The man on the floor was 25, undefeated, and couldn't breathe. The man standing over him was 39, broke, and already putting his boots back on. Caleb Webb had $91 in his account, a cracked rib, and a mortgage notice signed by the father of the man he'd just dropped in front of 60 people who came here expect something very different. He wasn't a fighter, he was a farmer. And tonight, that was the most dangerous thing in the room. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral, 22 years ago. He wasn't going to cry now, not over a machine, not over a letter from a bank, not over any of it. He was 39 years old, and he had 40 acres and $90, and a mother who needed insulin on Friday. Crying was not on the list. The machine was dead anyway. He knew it before he crawled underneath. Knew to it the way you know a storm is coming before the sky shifts. Something in the air, something in the silence where sound used to be. He slid under the combine anyway, because that's what you do when things break. You look at them, you put your hands on them. You make sure the thing you're afraid of is actually the thing that's wrong. It was. The hydraulic pump sat in the dark like a burned-out heart. Seized. Done. Not a repair. A replacement. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes. The Georgia heat pushed down through the barn roof, even at 10 o'clock at night. July didn't cool off after dark in this part of the state. It just got darker. The cicadas outside were going like they were getting paid for it. That wall of sound, steady and relentless, that people from the city called peaceful. It was not peaceful, it was just loud. He dragged himself back out and sat up on the concrete floor. He held his hands under the single work light hanging from the rafter. Black, both of them. Engine grease packed into every crease of his knuckles, every line of his palms. He picked up the rag from the floor beside him and dragged it across his skin. The grease moved around, that was all. Moved from one place to another, like it had nowhere better to be. He already knew what the pump cost. He'd looked it up 2 weeks ago, when the machine started making that sound, that grinding complaint machines make when they're deciding to give up. He'd looked it up and told himself he had time, that something would come together. Nothing had come together. The pump was $580. His checking account had $91 in it. His mortgage payment was due on the 1st of August, 12 days away. He sat on the barn floor in the heat and the insect noise and the greasy yellow light, and he did the math he already knew the answer to. It didn't add up. It never added up. He set the rag down. He stood. He turned off the work light. He walked to the house in the dark, and the dark was fine because he'd walked this path 10,000 times and his feet knew it without being told. That was the thing about staying somewhere long enough. The ground remembered you back. 40 acres. That's what Caleb DeRoy Webb owned. Bought 3 years ago from a man named Whitmore who'd given up on the land after 2 bad seasons and a divorce that hit harder than the drought did. 40 acres of Georgia clay and red dirt and possibility out on County Road 7, 11 miles from the nearest town with a stoplight. People around here had watched him buy it with the particular silence of people who've decided not to share their opinions directly. They smiled at the feed store, nodded at the gas station, made conversation about the weather. Caleb had learned, in places he didn't talk about anymore, how to read what people weren't saying. What they weren't saying was, "We'll see how long this lasts." That was 3 years ago. He was still here. 40 acres of corn and soybeans he'd coaxed out of soil that hadn't been worked right in years. He'd fixed the fencing himself, regraded the drainage ditches himself, rebuilt the barn door after the ice storm last February. One thing at a time. Every morning before the sun came up, every evening until he couldn't see. The work was quiet. When your hands are busy, your head is quieter. He'd spent enough years inside his own head to know that quiet was something you had to earn, every single day, or it would get away from you. He was 39 years old. He'd been trying to earn quiet for 12 years. Some days it worked. The house was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with linoleum that had seen better decades, a covered porch that listed slightly to the left, where the support post had rotted through. He showered in cold water because the water heater was doing something he hadn't diagnosed yet, and hot water was on the list of things that would have to wait. He stood in the kitchen in clean clothes, worn jeans, gray t-shirt, bare feet on the linoleum, and opened the refrigerator. Not because he was hungry. Just something to do with his hands while his brain caught up with the rest of him. He let the refrigerator close. He poured a glass of water from the tap and leaned against the counter and looked at the kitchen table. At the corner of an envelope he didn't recognize. He almost left it. He should have left it. He crossed to the table. The junk drawer was half open. He'd been looking for a flashlight battery 2 days ago and hadn't closed it properly. Behind the takeout menus and the dead flashlight and the rubber bands that had fused together from heat, jammed sideways, was a white envelope with a bank logo in the upper left corner. He didn't remember putting it there. He must have moved it without thinking, back when it arrived, back when seeing it on the counter was something he wasn't ready for yet. Third notice. He read it standing at the table. Then he read it again. Not because he didn't understand it the first time. $8,400. Due within 45 days. Past that, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The signature at the bottom was printed in neat block letters. Bradley Renner, Vice President, Harlan County Savings and Loan. Caleb had seen that name before, on the sign outside the brick building on Main Street. On the original mortgage paperwork 3 years ago, when the numbers had looked different and the future had looked like something manageable. He put the letter down on the table. He stood there for a minute. Then he poured the rest of his water into the sink and went to bed. He lay down. He didn't expect to sleep. He was right. He put his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling and let the problem settle in him the way problems did when you stopped trying to solve them and just let them be real. You didn't fight it once the shape of it was clear. You just let it set. By the time the birds started up outside his window, he knew the shape. He just didn't know what came next. Darlene Webb had been making red beans and rice since before Caleb was born. She made it the way her mother had made it and the way her mother's mother had made it before that. Low heat, long time. Bay leaves you fish out at the end. The smell of it filled the small house the next evening, like something warm trying to push the hard things out. She was 67 years old, and she moved through the kitchen like she owned it, which she did, in every way that mattered. The house was Caleb's, the kitchen was Darlene's. That had been established without discussion in the first week after she moved in, 2 years ago, when her blood sugar started doing things her doctor didn't like. And living alone 40 minutes away stopped making sense. Caleb had converted the second bedroom without being asked. He hadn't framed it as a favor. She hadn't thanked him for it. It was just the thing that needed to happen, so it happened. That was how they worked. She was setting the table when he came in from the barn. She looked at him the way mothers look at their adult children when something is wrong, and they're deciding whether to say so. She set down the second plate. She pulled out her chair. She sat. "Wash your hands," she said. He washed his hands. He sat across from her. She served him without asking how much he wanted. She'd been feeding him for 39 years. She knew. They ate without talking for a while. That was fine. They were comfortable with quiet, the two of them. Had been since Caleb's father died, when Caleb was 17, and the house got smaller and the silences got longer, and they both learned to live inside them. The overhead light buzzed faintly the way it did in the heat of summer. Outside, a truck passed on the county road. Darlene broke a piece of cornbread in half. "You've been under that machine for 3 hours," she said. "Not a question. Pump's dead. Can you fix it?" "Need a new one." She nodded once, kept eating. He watched her hands. They'd gotten thinner in the last year. The rings she wore, her mother's rings, 2 of them, gold and faded, sat looser on her fingers than they used to. He noticed this, and said nothing about it, and filed it in the place where he put things he was watching. "I'll figure it out," he said. She didn't argue with him. She didn't agree either. She looked at him with that long, steady look she had, the one that meant she had something to say, and was deciding if now was the time. "Your father worked this land," she said. "He waited, not this land, but land like it. Worked it until his back broke, and then he kept going. A pause, not for effect. Just because she meant it, and meant things slowly. Don't you break yours trying to save what we can find another way to save." Caleb said nothing. He thought about the letter, about the number on it, about the name signed at the bottom. He thought about putting all of it out between them, giving it a shape, letting someone else know the full weight of it. He couldn't do it. Not tonight. "I'll figure it out," he said again. She looked at him, went back to her food. After dinner, he washed the dishes. Both plates, the pot, the serving spoon. He wasn't sure why. He hadn't done it in months. Darlene always got to them before he thought to offer. Tonight he just stood at the sink while the water ran warm, and Darlene sat at the table with her after dinner decaf, and she didn't say a word about it. Some things you do because you need to do something with your hands. Because standing still with everything you're not saying would be worse. He dried his hands on the dish towel. He looked out the window above the sink at the dark yard and the dark barn and the dead machine sitting inside it. Tomorrow, he thought. Something tomorrow. Earl Gideon had run the same auto and agricultural parts shop on Route 9 for 31 years. He was 70 years old, built like a man who had spent 6 decades doing physical work and intended to spend a few more. White beard trimmed short. Reading glasses on a chain around his neck that he never seemed to actually use for reading. A habit of showing up when things were going sideways, which Caleb had noticed over 3 years and never commented on because commenting on it would have made Earl stop. He came by the next afternoon, pulled up in his old pickup, the same as always. Let himself through the fence gate the way people do when they've been coming somewhere long enough that knocking would feel strange. Found Caleb on the porch with a glass of water, not doing anything in particular, which was itself a kind of doing something. Earl climbed the 3 porch steps, sat in the other chair, pulled a folded section of newspaper from his shirt pocket, and set it on the small table between them without saying anything about it. Caleb looked at it, didn't touch it. Earl poured himself a glass from the pitcher and drank half of it. Hot, he said. Yeah, they sat for a while. Earl had a gift for sitting with people. Not a lot of men had it. Most men, when they came to sit with you, had an agenda already decided. They wanted to get to the point. Earl just sat. He had the patience of someone who understood that silence was not empty. The newspaper sat between them. Caleb picked it up eventually, unfolded it to the section Earl had folded to the top. Local events. The Tin Roof Bar. Open challenge fight on Saturday night, the listing said, with the careful indirectness of something technically illegal that had been happening long enough that nobody was rushing to stop it. $500 for anyone who lasted 3 minutes. The name below the listing, Kyle Renner. 25 years old, 3 amateur belts, gym owner. Caleb looked at the name for a moment. He refolded the paper, set it back on the table. Earl finished his water. Thought you should know, Earl said. He stood up. He walked back down the porch steps, got in his truck, drove away. The newspaper sat on the table. Caleb left it there and went back inside. It was still there at midnight, still there in the morning when he went out to stand on the porch before the heat got serious. He picked it up once more. Read it again. Renner. The same name as the letter in the kitchen drawer. He put the paper down. He told himself he wasn't thinking about it. He was absolutely thinking about it. He met Joe Summerfield at the gas station on Tuesday morning. He wouldn't have gone at all except the truck needed it, and there wasn't another station for 7 miles in either direction. He pulled up to pump 3 and got out, and there was Joe at pump 2, watching the numbers tick up on the display with the expression of a man watching money leave his life in real time. Caleb knew Joe the way you know people in a small county. Not close, just known. Joe had been welding for 20 years, has had a shop off of the highway way. Good work, fair prices, the kind of reputation that gets built slowly and can come apart fast. Something was wrong. That was the first thing Caleb registered. Joe Summerfield was a man who held himself a certain way. Solid, deliberate. The posture of someone who knew his trade and wasn't sorry about it. Standing at pump 2, he was holding himself differently, careful. Like something hurt and he'd built a system around protecting it. Caleb watched without watching. Habit he'd spent 12 years trying to turn off and never quite managed. Joe's jaw, the line of it was off. Not so you'd catch it passing him on the street. But the left side sat wrong. The way he was holding his mouth, slightly open, not quite closed all the way, like closing it fully would cost him something. Joe looked over, tried to nod. The movement was small. Caleb, they stood there a moment. "How you doing, kid?" Caleb said. Flat, already knowing. Joe was quiet. He put the pump handle back. He looked at the receipt coming out and took it and folded it and put it in his pocket and didn't look at it. "You know that kid," he said. "Kyle Renner. I know who he is. He came into the Tin Roof about 6 weeks ago." Joe paused, chose his next words with the care of a man who'd been choosing his words carefully for 6 weeks. "I went in with some guys from the shop. Friday thing. I didn't go up there to fight him." He started talking and I said something back and then he stopped, started again. "He's fast, Caleb. You press charges?" Joe made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Short, flat. The sound of a man who'd had this conversation before, in his own head 100 times. "I tried," he said. He didn't say anything more about it. He didn't have to. Harlan County. Police Benevolent Fund banner in the station window, the name on half the civic buildings in town. There were places where the law bent toward certain people without anyone needing to be told which direction to bend. Broke the jaw, Joe said. 3 teeth. Dentist says 2 more might go eventually from the damage. He looked at his own hands on the pump. "I can do the structural work still. But anything fine, close detail, my hands shake a little now. Doctor says it might settle. Might. He looked up then, directly at Caleb, for the first time in the conversation. "My wife's working nights," he said. "Distribution center. Picking up the hours I can't." He said it the way people say things they've accepted, but haven't finished accepting. The worst part is I knew. When I walked in there, I knew what kind of place it was. I knew who he was. I'm 41 years old, and somebody talked to me like I was nothing, and he stopped. He picked up his keys from the top of the pump. "You watch yourself out there," said. He got in his truck. He drove away. Caleb stood at the pump. He hadn't told Joe he was thinking about anything. Hadn't said a word about the tin roof or the newspaper or any of it. And Joe had said, "You watch yourself out there." He drove home. He didn't eat much at dinner. Darlene noticed and said nothing, and that was the right thing for her to do. That night, he went to the field, not to work. Nothing to be done out there at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. He walked past the dead combine at the edge of the barn and out into the rows, between the corn that came up past his chest now, stalks dry and thick and going gold at the edges. He stopped somewhere in the middle. He turned off his flashlight. He let the dark come up around him. He stood in the field and he thought about Darius Cole. He never meant to think about Darius. He'd built systems to avoid it. Keep the hands busy. Keep the hours full. Keep the problem in front of you small enough to grip. But out here in the dark with no task to perform, the usual machinery of avoidance had nothing to run on. Darius, 22 years old in the way combat soldiers are 22, old in the eyes and young everywhere else. He'd been on Caleb's team for 11 months. Good instincts, steady hands. The kind of man who let his work speak because the work didn't need help. Ramadi, July. The kind of heat that made the air look like water. A transmission had come through wrong, garbled. Caleb had waited, 1.2 seconds, it calculated later. As though the number itself meant something, he'd waited to confirm, and in that window Darius had moved. Then the sound. He'd gone to the hospital afterward, sat in the chair next to the bed, said something. He didn't remember now what. Something useless, probably, the kind of thing people say when they don't have the right thing, and silence feels like abandonment. Darius had looked at him for a long moment, then turned his face to the wall. Caleb had sat for 20 more minutes, then stood, then walked out. He never went back because going back hadn't seemed like something Darius wanted, and he hadn't trusted himself to know the difference between respecting that and using it as an excuse. 12 years. He'd carried it the way you carry something that doesn't have a name for itself. Not guilt exactly, something more precise than guilt. The specific and permanent knowledge of what a second and a fifth of a second had cost another man. The cost of one moment of caution in a place where caution had a price. He stood in the corn in the dark and thought, "This is not about the pump," he thought. "It is not about $500, he thought. Joe Summerfield is 41 years old, and his hands shake, and his wife works nights, and nobody has done anything about it, and nobody is going to do anything about it, and I am standing in a field, pretending I haven't already made this decision." He'd made it when Earl set the newspaper on the table. He just hadn't said it out loud yet. He turned on his flashlight. He walked back to the house. He lay down on his bed and looked at the ceiling and let the decision finish setting. The way concrete finishes setting is just don't rush, you just wait. And when it's done, you know it's done because nothing moves anymore. By the time the bird started, it was done. He did not tell Darlene. He ate breakfast with her, eggs and toasts, same plates, same table, same yellow kitchen palette. She talked about her doctor's appointment on Thursday, the change in her medication schedule. The woman at the pharmacy who'd worked there for 20 years and remembered everyone's name, Caleb. Listened. He said the right things at the right time, see. He did not say, "I'm going to bar fight tonight to win $500, because the father of the man I'm going to fight is the man taking my land." He did the dishes again. He went out to the barn. He worked on things that could be fixed until it was time to go. He wore what he wore every day, the Carhartt pants. This gray t-shirt with the bleach stain on the left shoulder from cleaning the shop sink 8 months ago. Work boots. He left the laces loose because he'd be taking them off. He thought about that on the drive over. Taking the boots off. Sitting at the edge of some makeshift ring and pulling off his socks and setting his boots neatly to one side, like a man getting ready for a doctor's appointment. Let them look. He'd learned long ago that the most dangerous thing in any room was the thing people had already decided not to take seriously. The tin roof was 11 miles out on a county road that turned to gravel for the last half mile. He'd driven past it a dozen times, never stopped. It was the kind of place that made its money on Friday and Saturday nights and spent the rest of the week looking like a storage unit with a beer sign in the window. Saturday came the way Saturdays did. Too fast and then all at once. Tonight, the gravel lot was full. He counted cars out of habit. 38, maybe more, around the back. He parked at the far end, backed in. He sat for a moment with the engine running. He thought about Joe Summerfield's jaw sitting wrong. He got out. The heat inside the tin roof was a living thing. 2 industrial fans mounted up near the roofline with blades the size of whole airplane propellers, running full speed, making enormous noise, accomplishing almost nothing except moving the hot, sour air from one side of the room to the other. Caleb stood just inside the door and let his eyes adjust. Low lights, atmospheric, just cheap. A jukebox in the far corner losing a battle against the crowd noise. 60 people, maybe more. Men mostly, a few women. The kind of crowd that came to watch something hurt. He knew that look. He'd seen it on different faces, in different places. Same look everywhere. He let his gaze move through the room the way water finds its level. Exits first. Habit. 2 doors, the main one he'd come through. A secondary one on the side wall, propped open with a wooden wedge. Bar along the right wall. Pool table area cleared to the left. Center of the room, 20 by 20 feet of foam mats, held together with duct tape going up at the corners. And in the center of the mats, Kyle Renner. Caleb had seen him before. Once outside the bank, once at the hardware store. Never close, never reason to look carefully. Close up, Kyle Renner was exactly what the newspaper had suggested. 25. Athletic the way men are when they've never had to be strong for reasons other than looking strong. Black shorts, hand wraps, tanned the color of someone who worked out near windows. He was throwing combinations, jab, cross, jab, hook, fast and clean. Every punch snapped loud in the heavy air. Good hands. Caleb looked at his feet. There it was. Clean soles. Smooth. No calcicing on the balls of the feet. No thickening across the toes. The feet of a man who had spent his entire fighting life on padded mats in facilities, with coaches watching and referees ready to stop anything that went past the line. A man who had never had to fight somewhere where stopping it wasn't an option. Caleb went to the bar. Dale Hutchins was behind it. 52, gray at the temples, a face that had made its decisions a long time ago and wasn't renegotiating. He'd been running this place 18 years. He looked at Caleb the way bartenders look at people they haven't seen before in rooms where everyone else knows each other, reading him, deciding. Club soda, Sue, Caleb said. Dale made it, slid it across. Caleb drank it standing at the bar and watched Kyle Renner move, watched his hip, the rotation on the jab, the way the left hip opened and closed, the way the right leg planted on the cross. You could tell everything about a fighter from the hips. The hips were where the power lived and where the lies happened, where the telegraphing came through before the hands did. Kyle had good rotation, trained, consistent, clean, but on the hook the right hand dropped. Not much, half an inch, maybe less. The kind of tell a proper coach would have corrected years ago, or that a sparring partner with fast eyes would have punished until it stopped. Half an inch. Caleb finished his club soda. He set the glass down on the bar. He walked to the edge of the mats. Dale saw him coming. He moved from behind the bar to the side of the mat area without hurrying, the practiced movement of a man who'd been doing this long enough to have a routine for it. You registering? Yes. Dale looked at him. The oil stain on the shirt, the worn boots, the way Caleb was standing, not announcing himself, shoulders slightly rolled, nothing performed. Name? Webb. He said it at normal volume. Kyle Renner, 12 feet away, stopped mid-combination. Caleb wasn't looking at Kyle. He was looking at the mat, the duct tape at the corners, peeling back. He filed it. You know the rules? Dale said. 3 minutes. Submission or knockout. So eyes, no biting. 500 if you last. I know. Dale nodded slowly. Webb. Kyle said it like he was testing the weight of it, like he was deciding what it meant. Caleb looked at him then. Kyle was looking back with a kind of attention that Caleb recognized. Not quite recognition, something more specific. The look of a man who has heard a name somewhere before tonight in a different room, in a conversation he was one side of. "You're the one who bought the Whitmore place," Kyle said. "Yeah." Kyle smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who has just received information he finds useful. Caleb had seen that smile before. On different faces in different lighting, same smile wherever it appeared. He turned back to Dale. "When do we start?" He walked to the edge of the mats and sat on the wooden stool there. He unlaced his boots, took them off, set them on the floor outside the mat boundary, side by side, heels even, peeled off his socks, folded them, tucked them into the left boot. The room got quieter while he did this. He stepped onto the mats in bare feet. His feet were pale and scarred, the calluses built thick across both balls from years of working ground that wasn't flat. The skin on his heels hard enough paw to be its own kind of armor. He stood at his side of the mat. Kyle was bouncing, light and rhythmic, the breathing of a man who had a pre-fight groove and had dropped into it. Controlled, prepared, looking at Caleb the way a man looks at something he's already decided the outcome of. Caleb stood still, not performing stillness, just nothing to do yet. His heart rate was up, unavoidable. His body knew what was coming even when he was standing quiet. But the elevation was even, not the spike of fear. He recognized the difference from other rooms, other moments. He'd felt the spike enough times to know what it felt like when it wasn't there. This wasn't fear. This was something older and quieter. Dale to the center, looked at both of them. He chopped his hand down. Caleb looked at the barn in his mind, the dead combine, the duct tape on the mat corners, the letter on his kitchen table, Joe Summerfield's jaw sitting wrong. And he let all of it go still, and then Kyle Renner closed the distance, and the 3 minutes began. Kyle closed the distance in less than a second. No feeler jab, no testing of range. He came straight for the overhand right, full commitment, aimed at the jaw, the finishing blow. 3 seconds and good night, the way he'd done it before, the way he expected to do it again. Caleb didn't slip it clean. He hunched, pulled his chin down, and rolled his right shoulder up and let Kyle's fist crash into his forehead instead, the thickest bone in the skull. The place that breaks hands. The crack of it silenced the nearest row of the crowd. Kyle stumbled back half a step, shaking his right hand. The expression on his face moved surprise, then pain, then anger, covering both of them before anyone could read what was underneath. Caleb felt it in his back teeth. White light behind his eyes, immediate and specific. A wave of nausea starting in the stomach and climbing. He tasted blood where the ends of his cheek had caught against his teeth. The headache arrived fully formed, that particular pressure between the eyes that meant the brain had moved inside the skull. He didn't go down, he stood. Something said in the back of his head, in a voice he hadn't heard in years, "Stay small. Let him work. Watch the hips," old voice. The kind that gets burned into you not by repetition, but by consequence. He'd spent a long time trying to turn it down. Out here in the heat with 60 people watching and his cheek bleeding into his mouth, it was louder than everything else in the room. Kyle came back angrier. Anger made him faster. That was the honest truth about anger in a fight. It wasn't always wrong. Sometimes it was fuel. Kyle was young enough and trained enough to run on it without losing his form, and the jab he sent into Caleb's nose was fast and it landed and Caleb's head back. Not broke, protested. There was a difference. Then the low kick to the left thigh. The sound of it was wet and heavy, the sound of impact traveling through dense muscle. And the woman in the front row, young, phone up and recording, pulled her chin back like she'd felt it herself. Caleb's leg buckled, just slightly, just enough to show. Of course he saw it. He was watching for it, the way trained fighters watch for the first sign that the body is starting to fail its owner. He came for the high roundhouse, right leg targeting the temple, the ending move, the one that had finished other nights in this same room, for this same crowd, with this same look on his face. Caleb stepped into it, not away, into, forward inside the arc before the leg could load its momentum. Kyle's shin slapped against his ribs and wrapped around it back, and there was nothing behind it, no force, like being hit by a wave that's already spent itself on the shore. Kyle was on one leg with his momentum broken and his balance wrong. Caleb put his weight into him and pushed. It was not a technique. It had no name. It was 210 pounds of a man deciding to move another man who was standing on one foot, and physics doing the rest. Kyle went down hard. Back hit the mat, air left his body in a loud involuntary rush, and he lay there for one full second that felt longer than a second. The room went silent, not the silence of crowd anticipation. Something else. The silence of 60 people recalibrating. They'd watched Kyle Renner work for months. They had a story in their heads about how tonight was going to go. That story had just developed a problem. Kyle got his forearms under him, got himself up. His face was red, not flushed from effort, red from something more specific. The particular color that comes when a man who has never been publicly embarrassed is being publicly embarrassed for the first time. The performance was gone, the bouncing, crowd work, the easy confidence of a man who knew how the room saw him. Gone. Replaced by something Caleb recognized from other contexts, other rooms. The face of recalibration, of a man updating his understanding of what he was dealing with. Lucky, Kyle said. Voice tight, just loud enough. 2 minutes, Dale said from the edge. Kyle shifted his stance lower, tired. He brought his hands up into a proper Muay Thai guard, elbows close, protecting the center line, chin down. This was the fighter underneath the showman. Caleb could see the real training now. The weight distribution was right. The structure was right. The eyes had changed from morphing to calculating. He was better than the first 30 seconds had suggested. That was fine. Kyle came forward with intention. Low kick to the left leg again. Same leg, working the existing damage. Smart targeting. The kind of thing a good coach did and a smart fighter remembered. Caleb checked it, lifted his lead leg, and took the impact on the shin. Bone against bone. The crack went through the room like a bat on wood. Kyle's shin swelled on contact. Caleb saw it happen. But Kyle planted and threw the elbow immediately after, right arm, targeting the bridge of Caleb's nose, the combination designed to punish the check, to make you regret lifting the leg. Caleb slipped it by a fraction. The rough fabric of Kyle's hand wrap scraped across his cheekbone. That close, that much margin between the intended target and open air, and with that proximity, the smell. Aerosol body spray, and underneath it, cutting through it with a chemical honesty that no amount of product could suppress, fierce sweat, the specific smell of it. Metallic and sharp, different in composition from exertion sweat, different in what it meant. Capable of hiding the difference before his brain named it. The combination of heat and close quarters, and that smell did something he hadn't expected. It pulled him out of the room. Al Anbar, July. The air there smelled fine dust and heated metal, and something underneath both of those that he'd never been able to name and had stopped trying to. The radio in his ear was going, static heavy, the voice on the other end breaking up in the transmission. He needed the confirmation before he gave the order. He was waiting for the confirmation. He waited 1.2 seconds. He heard Darius move. He gave the order. He heard the mat under his bare feet. The ceiling fan turning. The jukebox, far away, playing something no one was listening to. Caleb blinked. He pulled himself back to the bar, to the heat, to the 60 people, and the foam mats and the duct tape peeling at the corners. He was back, but he'd been gone for a fraction of a second. Less than a second. Less than 1.2 seconds. Kyle saw it. He was fast and he'd been watching, and he saw the moment where Caleb's eyes went somewhere else and he moved on it immediately. Both hands locked behind Caleb's neck, fingers interlaced, pulling the head down, the plum clinch. Classic control position. Kyle's coming forward, using the grip to pull Caleb into his own rising knee. The right knee came up hard. It caught Caleb on the left side, just below the rib cage. The sound that came out of him was not voluntary. A short, compressed exhalation, the sound a body makes when something structural has changed against its will. He knew before he finished the thought, knew from the grinding sensation beneath the skin, from the way the pain arrived differently from impact pain, specific and deep and wrong in a way that surface pain wasn't. The rib was cracked, not clean, but cracked. White came through his vision. His legs nearly went. The crowd erupted, the kind of noise a crowd makes when they think they've seen the end of something. Kyle pulled back for the second knee. He never got it. The pain hit a switch. Caleb had tried to explain this to people who hadn't been in combat and given up on explaining it to people who had, because people who had already understood. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't courage. It was older than either of those things. Something below thinking, something that had been built into him over years in places he didn't name anymore. And when genuine damage arrived, it stopped waiting for instructions and started operating on its own. He went somewhere simple. His thumbs found the notch at the base of Kyle's throat, the soft space just above the clavicle where the trachea sits without protection. He pressed inward and upward. Kyle choked. Both hands dropped from Caleb's neck immediately, the airway protection reflex faster than any trained response, faster than anything Kyle practiced, because it was older than practice. Caleb's left hand went to the back of Kyle's head, fingers into the gelled hair. His right forearm came across in a crossface, not a boxing strike, not a technique you'd name in a gym, just his full shoulder turning hard. The forearm making contact at the jaw, the torque it produced twisting Kyle's neck and destroying his base in the same motion. He swept Kyle's supporting leg at the ankle while he did it. They went down together, but not the same way. Kyle went down wrong, no control over where he landed, no preparation for the contact. His face hit the mat. Kyle scrambled. He knew the ground game. He'd trained it, taught it, understood the positions and the names and the escapes. He tried to pull half guard, tried to create the frame, tried to work the sequence. Caleb went right over the guard. 210 pounds settled into a mount so complete, it felt like something had been decided. Kyle's chest compressed under the weight. His breathing came a different thing, effortful and shallow. Every inhale a negotiation. Kyle bench pressed, both arms, trying to push Caleb up and off, the panic move. The thing your body demands you try when it overrides everything your training has taught you and goes straight back to the oldest instructions it has. Caleb swam his arms inside the push. His left arm went under Kyle's neck. His right hand walked across and grabbed a handful of board short fabric at the shoulder. Dropped his forehead to the mat beside Kyle's ear. He squeezed, no yanking, no jerking. Pressure, even, applied, steadily increasing. The carotid arteries compressed against the windpipe. The Ezekiel choke modified bare hands, no rules about where to grip. Kyle thrashed. He went through the sequence his training had given him. Buck, roll attempt, hip escape, each one arriving at the same wall. 210 pounds of a man who was not moving, who had decided not to move, and had the physical foundation to make that decision mean something. Kyle's heels beat against the mat. His hands tore at Caleb's forearms, nails digging small half-moons into the skin, drawing thin lines of blood. Caleb registered the sensation without registering it as pain, information. Kyle still had motor control, still conscious. Not done yet. He held the pressure. Steady. Even. The way you tighten a bolt, you don't want to strip, not force. Just consistent application of what's needed. Kyle's movement slowed, not stopped. The quality of them changed, the thrashing becoming something smaller, the kicks against the mat losing their force, the hands on Caleb's forearms losing their grip. Caleb could see Kyle's face from where he was. The color had changed, dark, mottled, the jaw working without producing anything, the eyes wide and then wider and then starting to lose their focus at the edges. 3 seconds, Caleb said into the mat next to Kyle's ear. No anger in it, no satisfaction, a statement of fact. What would happen in 3 seconds wasn't a threat, it was biology. He released the pressure slightly, not all the way. Enough, he waited. Kyle's right hand lifted off the mat. I came back down once, twice, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb let go completely. He stayed where he was for one breath. One measured breath that sent fire through his left side from the cracked rib. Then he pushed himself off Kyle, rolled to his knees and stood up. His left leg carried him and argued about it at the same time. He stood anyway. Kyle was on his side, coughing, big ragged pulls of air coming back into a system that had been denied them. The sound is emergency response taking over where the conscious mind had failed. His hands were at his throat. His eyes were wet, not emotion. The oxygen's response, chemistry doing what it did. He curled slightly, the instinctive position of a body that has just been through something and is taking inventory. He looked up at Caleb, waiting for what came next, waiting for the boot, the taunt, the performance of dominance, waiting for what winners did in rooms like this when they had a man down. Caleb wasn't looking at him. He was looking at his boots, sitting at the edge of the mat where he'd left them, side by side, heels even. The room was silent, not the silence of 60 people holding still. The silence of 60 people who weren't sure what language to use for what they'd just watched. The usual vocabulary didn't fit. They'd come for something they knew how to respond to, skill versus lack of skill, youth versus age, the satisfying story of the obvious outcome. They hadn't come for this. This had no satisfying story shape. It was too plain and too complete, and it had happened too fast and not fast enough. Dale walked over. His boots were loud on the plywood. He had the roll of bills in his hand. He held it out without saying anything. Caleb took it. 500s, damp with Dale's sweat. He folded them once and pushed in the front paw of his Carhartts. The paper felt thick. Real. $500 was a real thing, a physical thing with weight. He'd been thinking about it for days as a number, and it felt different now as an object. Christ, Webb, Dale said, low enough that the room couldn't hear. Not performing it, just saying it. Where'd that come from? Caleb didn't answer. He walked to the edge of the mat and sat on a wooden stool. He picked up his right sock, pulled it on, then the left, then the right boot, lacing it, then the left. He did all of this slowly, because standing up fast with a cracked rib in front of 60 people was not something he was willing to do. Not because of pride. Because fast movement would produce an involuntary sound, and he wasn't going to make that sound in this room. When both boots were on, laces loose, bending over to tighten them was not happening tonight. He stood. He started for the door. He passed the mat. Kyle was sitting up, one hand braced against the mat, the other still at his throat. The color in his face was coming back down toward normal. The look on his face was not the look of a man about to say something aggressive. The performance that had been there when Kyle walked into this room was entirely gone, and what was under it was younger than 25. More honest than anything he'd shown yet. He looked up at Caleb. His mouth started to open. Caleb stopped. He looked down at Kyle Renner for a moment. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just looking. At the bloody nose, the wet eyes, the hand still protective at the throat. At the youth of the face without the confidence covering it. He'd seen Kyle's wrist during the fight. Specifically the right wrist on the second overhand attempt, the moment of hyperextension when the fist had found forehead instead of jaw. The setup for a scaphoid fracture. 8 to 12 weeks to heal if it happened. Longer if Kyle did what men like Kyle always did and pushed through it without letting it heal. Keep your wrist tighter, Caleb said. His voice came out the way it always came out when he'd been breathing hard, lower than usual, concrete and gravel. The right one. You're going to break a scaphoid hitting that way. Kyle stared at him, and tuck your chin on the overhand, every time. Not when you remember to, every time. Kyle's mouth closed. Whatever he'd been about to say stayed unsaid. Caleb pushed through the heavy door and out into the July night. The Georgia dark hit him across the face. Hot still, but open. After the compressed stink of the bar, the sweat and beer, and 2 industrial fans recycling the same bad air, the outside felt almost clean. Almost like something you could breathe without thinking about it. He crossed the gravel lot. The stones ground under his boots, loud in the quiet, the only sound he was making. He got into the cab of the Ford. The truck smelled like stale coffee and old dust and whatever the previous owner had spilled in the back seat at some point in the truck's prior life. The dashboard glowed green and low. He sat for a moment without starting the engine, without doing anything. His hands were on the steering wheel. He looked at them. The right one had swollen across the knuckles, not badly, not broken. Swollen in the way of bone that had contacted other bone harder than it wanted to. His left forearm had the half-moon marks from Kyle's nails, small and red, already starting to crust at the edges. They'd be scabbed by morning, his rib. He took a breath, slow, controlled, through his nose, and felt the geography of the damage. Sharp on the inhale. Sharper if he let the breath expand too far. The grinding was gone now that he wasn't under load, but the wrongness was there. A specific complaint from a specific place. Not a full break, a crack. He'd had broken ribs before, and he knew the spectrum. This was the bad version of a crack and the minor version of a break, sitting in the territory between. He'd work with it. He had to. He pulled the 500s from his pocket. He held them in the dashboard glow. $500. He looked at the bills for a long time.
This was not a trophy?
This was not what winning felt like. This was $500 during a dirty bar on a county road, and enough to buy the pump, barely, if he didn't think too hard about what was left over. And it was nowhere near enough for the number on the letter in the kitchen drawer. And he'd known both of those things before he walked in, and he'd walked in anyway. Because the pump a problem in front of him tonight. The letter was the problem for another day, a different shape requiring different tools, and he didn't have a plan for it yet, but he would. There would be a next thing. There was always a next thing. You addressed the shape in front of you, and then you found the shape after that. Tonight's shape was $500 and a cracked rib and a long drive home. He put the truck in gear. He pulled out onto the county road and drove into the dark with one window down and the warm air coming through and his broken rib keeping time with every seam in the asphalt. The radio stayed off. The cicadas were still going. He was 4 miles from home when the phone rang. Unknown number. He almost let it go. He was tired in the specific way you get tired when adrenaline drops out of your system and takes everything with it. Not sleepy, just empty, like a jar that's been poured out. He wanted the couch and ice if there was any, and the particular silence of a house that was his. He picked up anyway, a pause. The kind of pause that has a person in it then. Caleb. One word. He knew the voice before the next word could come. Knew it. Somewhere below thought, the way you know the sound of weather changing or an engine note shifting. The knowledge arrived before he could have explained how. It's Darius, the voice said. Caleb pulled the truck onto the gravel shoulder without deciding to. The tires crunched off the asphalt. He put it in park. He left the engine running. The headlights cut out into a field that looked like his own in the dark. He held the phone. He sat there with Darius Cole's voice in his ear and 12 years of silence between them and the cracked rib making itself known with every breath and the $500 folded in his front pocket and the county road empty in both directions and the night all around him, thick and warm and without any particular interest in what he did next. He sat there. Yeah, he said finally. It's me. And the field in the headlights didn't move and the cicadas went on, and whatever came next was going to come in the morning, the way things always did. The morning was still there. It always was. He pulled over. Not because he had to. The road was empty in both directions, flat and dark and indifferent. He could have driven and talked. He'd done harder things at the same time, but he pulled over anyway. Onto the gravel shoulder, front tires crunching off the asphalt, headlights cutting out into a field that looked like his own in the dark. He put it in park, left the engine running because the engine was the only sound there was, and he wasn't ready for silence yet. He held the phone against his ear. Darius, he said. Not a question, not a greeting. Just the words sitting between them across whatever miles of open air existed between Swing County Road and wherever Darius Cole was standing right now. Yeah, Darius said. It's me. 12 years. Caleb had thought about this call before. Not planned for it, not practiced anything. But in the way you think about things you do believe will never happen, rehearsing them in the back of your mind while telling yourself yo aren't, he'd imagined it. The conversation. How you started a sentence that accounted for 12 years of silence and 1.2 steets that had cost a man his left eye. He'd never come up with anything worth saying. How'd you get this number? Caleb said. Earl Gideon. Of course. A sound came out of Caleb that wasn't quite a laugh, not humor. Just the particular excellence of a man confronted with something that was exactly what he should have expected and somehow still surprised him. That old man worries more than you think, Darius said. There was something in his voice, not quite amusement, not quite warmth, something more careful than either. The voice of a man who had learned to speak around difficult things without pretending they weren't there. He didn't tell me he was going to do that, Caleb said. No, I don't think he tells people what he's going to do. He just does it and waits to see what happens. Caleb looked out through the windshield, the field in the headlights. Corn probably, or soybeans, he couldn't tell in the dark. The stalks moved slightly in whatever thin breeze was coming off the low ground to the east, just the tops of them. A slow, dark wave that didn't mean anything. You in Atlanta, Caleb said. Not a questioned it. Earl's about 4 years now. Earl said you were doing something with veterans, reintegration program, through a nonprofit connected to the VA. A pause. Not the pause of someone searching for words. The pause of someone choosing them. I work with guys trying to figure out what their life looks like after the service. A lot of them are pretty lost when they come in. Caleb said nothing to that. I was pretty lost, Darius said, for a long time. Took me a while to find something that made sense to do with. He stopped. Then, with what I had left. The engine ticked. The warm air came in through the cracked window. Out in the field, the tops of the corn moved and went still and moved again. Darius, Caleb said. Yeah. I went to the hospital. I know you did. You didn't. He stopped, tried again, turned away. A pause on the other end, long enough that Caleb checked the to make sure the call was still connected. It was. the seconds ticking up in the corner. I know, Darius said. I was angry. You had every right to be. I did. Simply. No performance around it, no rushing past it to make Caleb feel better. Just. I did. The way you say a true thing when you've been living with it long enough that it doesn't need decoration anymore. I was angry for a long time. Years. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't because you'd know I was lying and it wouldn't help either one of us. Caleb's hand tightened on the steering wheel. But here's what I want to tell you, Darius said. And I want you to actually hear it. Not let it go past you while you're already all deciding what to say back. Because I've thought about whether to make this call for about 8 months, and I've decided I'm going to say it, and you're going to have to figure out what to do with it. All right, I'm okay. 2 words. The field in the headlights, the corn moving. Caleb sat with those 2 words and felt what they did to the stone he'd been carrying for 12 years. The stone didn't disappear. It didn't get lighter. Something else happened, something harder to name. Like the weight had redistributed. Like someone had put a hand under part of it without being asked. I built something, Darius continued. It took a long time, and it looked nothing like what I thought it was going to look like. But I got here. I got to a place where I know I'm getting up in the morning, and the guys I work with need what I've got to give them, and most days that's enough. Caleb said nothing. He was listening the way he used to listen in the field, the kind of listening that's not waiting for your turn to talk, just receiving. What happened in Ramadi happened, Darius said. I'm not telling you it was fine. I'm not telling you it doesn't matter. It happened and it cost what it cost, and that's true. But I'm also telling you that it didn't end me. You need to hear the difference. Yeah, I don't think you do yet, but you will. A pause, maybe. Something loosens in Caleb's chest, not fully, not in the way of Zongzoling's resolved his. More the way a knot loosens 1 degree when you stop pulling against it. Earl said you went back to farming, Darius said. The tone shifting slightly, moving towards something less heavy. Bought some land, 3 years ago. Out on County Road 7. You doing all right out there? Caleb thought about the pump. The letter. The rib currently making itself known with every breath. The $500 in his pocket and the $8,400 on the letter in his kitchen drawer. The bard he'd just walked out of with blood drying on the inside of his cheek. Working on it, he said. A sound from Darius, low and brief, the sound of recognition. Yeah, that sounds right. Another pause, this one from the others. Not weighted, not careful. The natural pause between people who've said the hard thing and are letting it find its level. I run a thing on Saturday mornings, Jay said. Group session. Mostly, guys, 25-40. Some just got out. Some have been out for years and still haven't figured out what out means. He paused. I'd like you to come sometime. Not to do anything. Not to talk if you don't want to. Just to sit in the room and let them see someone who's still in it. Still working. Still getting up. Why me? Because most of what I can offer them is words, and words only go so far. What they need at TC is somebody who made it through something real and came out the other side still standing. Even if standing looks like a man who hustles himself half to death on 40 acres and hasn't figured all of it out yet. A pause, especially that, actually. Caleb looked out at the dark field. I'm not a success story, Darius. Nobody's asking for one. You know what success stories do for guys who are really struggling? They make them feel worse. Like they're the only ones who can't get their footing. What helps is seeing somebody who's still trying. Still in the middle of it. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck with his free hand. Felt the knot there that had lived in that exact spot for years. The permanent tension that neither sleep nor physical work had ever fully dissolved. Let me think on it, he said. That's all I'm asking. A beat. How's your Caleb started? Stopped. Darius said, filling in the word without judgment, not making anything of the fact that Caleb hadn't been able to say it. Just the word. Put it out there so it could stop being unspeakable. It's fine. It's not there anymore, so there's not much for it to be. But I'm fine. I'm genuinely fine, Caleb. Okay. Another pause. Go home, Darius said. Get some sleep. The call ended. Caleb sat on the shoulder of the county road with the engine running and the phone in his hand and the night pressing warm against the windows. The field in the headlights didn't move. The tops of the corn went still. The cicadas were going out in the dark beyond the light's reach, the same as they'd been going all night, the same as they'd been going all summer. He sat there for a while. He wasn't measuring time. He was doing something he almost never let himself do, was nothing. Just sitting in a moment without already being in the next one. Just letting what had just happened be something that had just happened without immediately turning it into a plan or a problem or a next step. Darius Cole had been looking for him. Not Caleb finding Darius after 12 years of guilt finally breaking through the surface. Darius looking for Caleb. For a year, Earl had, as they said. Carrying whatever he'd wanted to say for a year while Caleb had been out on his 40 acres convincing himself that the silence was respectful rather than outwardly. He's turned the truck back onto the road. He drove home in the dark with the window down and the warm air coming in and his broken rib keeping its own time with the road. Darzant was on the porch, no lights. She was sitting in the dark in the old wooden chair, the one with the arm that had been repaired twice and would need it again before the cold came. Housecoat on, a glass off of water on the small table beside her, untouched. The posture of someone who had been sitting long enough to stop thinking about sitting. Caleb pulled the truck in, turned off the engine. He sat in the cab for a moment, looking at her through the windshield. 67 years old, sitting in the dark waiting for her son. She hadn't called, hadn't had texted, hadn't done anything except be there, which was the thing she had always done, the one constant he'd had since he was 17 years old, and the world shrank, and she stayed in it. He got out. He walked to the porch. Every step on the gravel was loud in the quiet. Every step up the porch stairs sent a message from his rib. He didn't hurry, and he didn't slow down. He sat on the top step, not in the other chair. On the step itself, below her eye level, looking out at the dark and the darker tree line and the faint smear of stars above the humidity. Darlene said nothing. She let him sit. The night sounds came in around them, the cicadas. A dog somewhere far off, one slow bark, and then nothing. The porch boards settling in the cooling air, that long, slow creak of wood old houses make when the temperature drops a degree or two after midnight. He didn't know how long they sat there. Long enough that he stopped noticing the rib for a few minutes. Long enough for his shoulders to come down from where they'd been all night. "You're holding your left side," she said. He looked down. His right hand was resting against his ribs. He hadn't noticed. Not pressing, just there, the way a hand finds a familiar thing in the dark. "Rib," he said. She made a sound. Not sympathy and not judgment. Acknowledgement. The sound of a woman noting a fact. "Did you get what you went for?" She was quiet for a moment. A full moment, letting that sit. "That's not what I meant," she said. He looked out at the yard. He said, "I know." The dog in the distance barked once more. Further away this time, or quieter. He turned the phone over in his hand. Once, set it on the step beside him. "Darius called," he said. Darlene went still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of a woman who has been waiting for a particular thing to happen for a long time and is now hearing that it has. She knew the name. Caleb had never told her the full story. He hadn't told anyone the full story. But she knew it, the way mothers know the names their children carry differently from all the other names, the ones that live in a different register, that change something in the voice when they're said or not said. "Tonight?" she said, on the drive home. What did he say? Caleb thought about how to compress it. About the architecture of what Darius had said and how you turned it into something that fit in a regular conversation between a man and his mother on a porch at 2 in the morning. "He said he's okay," Caleb said. "He said he built something. In Atlanta. Works with veterans now, is he?" "I think so." A pause. "Yeah, I think he actually is." Darlene picked up her glass of water, drank some, set it back. The ice had long since melted. 12 years, Caleb said, not to her specifically, just out into the dark, where it could go as far as it needed to. "I've been carrying what I thought I did to that man for 12 years, and he called tonight to tell me he's okay. People all find their way to that," she said. "He found his way to it before I found mine. He's been looking for me for a year, Darlene. Earl told him where I was, and he called. I didn't reach out, he did." She was quiet. I should gone back to that hospital," he said. "After he turned away, I should have gone back and sat in that chair again, not said anything. Just been there. I left because you were ashamed," she said, not gently, not harshly, just accurately, the way she always said accurate things. Like the accuracy was kindness enough and soft-mouthing it would be condescending. "Yeah. Shame makes cowards out of brave men," she said. "Always has. Your father used to say that shame was just fear that had learned to dress itself up. Walk around looking respectable." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. "He say a lot of things like that?" "He said a lot of things. Something in her voice shifted, old and fond and sad at the same time, the particular register people use for the dead when they've lived long enough with the absence to stop being angry at it. Most of them were right. He didn't always live by them, same as everybody. The porch was quiet for a while. Darius wants me to come to Atlanta, Caleb said. He runs a group. Saturday mornings. Says he wants me to come sit in the room, let the guys see come one, tell them still in it. Are you going to go? I told him I'd think on it. That's not the same as no, Caleb said. It's not. Darlene settled back in her chair. The old wood shifted and resettled. You know what I've been watching you do for 3 years, she said. He waited. He work, she said, from before light to past dark. 7 days. You work like if you stop, the whole thing falls apart. Like the land needs you every minute, or it'll decide to be someone else's. She paused. But that's not why you work that hard. He looked out at the yard. The barn was a dark shape against the slightly lighter dark of the sky. You work that hard, she said, because when your hands are going, your head is quieter. And quiet is the only thing I've been able to give yourself since you came home. He didn't say anything. I'm not telling you to work less, she said. The land is real. What it needs is real. I'm telling you that 40 acres of Georgia clay is not the same as putting things right. And you know it. You've known it. The cicadas went on. The stars turned barely perceptibly above the humidity haze. Forgiveness finds its way, she said. It always does, You just have to stay alive long enough for it to reach you. He sat with that. After a while, he heard her chair creak, and her slow footsteps cross the porch boards and the screen door open and close softly behind her. She hadn't said night. She didn't need to. He sat on the step alone for a while longer, not thinking exactly, not planning. Just sitting in the particular quiet of a decision that had already been made and was waiting for morning to start becoming real. Then he went inside. He slept, not well and not long, and twice the rib woke him when he rolled left without thinking. But he slept, which was more than he'd had in 2 days. And when he woke before the birds, he lay still for a few minutes, listened to the house, and felt something different in it. Not fixed, not resolved. Just different the way a room feels different after a window has been opened. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window with the mug and watched the dark outside the glass begin to reconsider itself. The tree line first, gaining its edge back, then the barn roof, then the field coming out of the dark the way it always did, slowly, without drama, the way the world came back every morning regardless of what had happened the night before. He drank the coffee. He thought about what came next. Not the $8,400, not yet, not this morning. That was its own shape requiring its own tools. He thought about Lena Kowalski at the clinic, who had mentioned months ago a USDA loan program for small farms, and he'd let it go past him. He thought about the Veterans Advocacy Office in town he'd gotten a flyer for and thrown away without reading. He thought about conversations he hadn't been having, the doors he hadn't been walking through. Because walking through doors meant acknowledging that alone wasn't working anymore. He'd been treating the problem like a math problem with only the numbers in front of him. What was in his account against what he owed? Impossible. But that wasn't all the numbers. He'd been looking at it with the narrowed vision of a man too tired and too stubborn and too used to being the only resource in any room, who had built a whole system around solving things alone because alone was what his life had required for so long that he'd stopped questioning whether it was still what the situation called for. The coffee went cold while he stood there. He poured it out and made a fresh cup and drank it at the table, and when he was done, he put on his Carhartts and his gray t-shirt and his work boots and went out to the barn. Earl Gideon's shop opened at 7. Caleb knew this without checking because Earl had opened at 7 for 31 years and saw no compelling reason to revise it. He pulled into the gravel lot at 4 minutes past the hour. Earl's truck was already there. The lights inside were already on. He went in. The shop smelled the way it always smelled. Oil and metal and old wood and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke from the previous owner more than 20 years back that had worked itself so deep into the walls that no amount of fresh air had made a dent in it. A smell that had become simply what this place was, inseparable from the man who ran it. Earl was behind the counter. He looked at Caleb the way he'd looked at Caleb since the first time they'd met 3 years ago, when Caleb had come in looking for a belt drive and Earl had found one in the back that shouldn't have fit but did, that look, taking in and already decided at the same time. He looked at the bruise coming up across Caleb's cheekbone. The way Caleb was standing, his weight distributed slightly wrong, favoring the left. He didn't say anything about either of those things. "Hydraulic pump," Caleb said. "For the John Deere. Know what you need," Will said. He turned, went into the back. Caleb heard him moving between the shelves, the confident movement of a man who knew every inch of his own space and didn't need to think about navigating it. Earl came back with a box, set it on the counter. Caleb looked at it, older box, worn at the edges. He reached over and turned it, checked the spec label on the side. Remanufactured unit, not new. It would work. "What's the price?" said Caleb Hizzard. "300. Caleb looked up. Earl looked back at him with the unhurried expression of a man who has said what he said and is prepared to wait as long as necessary. "New one's 580, Caleb said. "This one's 300. "Earl, rebuilt, unit, tested myself last week." He folded his hands on the counter. "Don't argue with old men, boy. We've been at it longer than you, and we're considerably better at it." Caleb looked at the box. He thought about Pride, a particular brand of it that made a man refuse good help because accepting it felt like admitting something. He knew that brand well. He'd worn it a long time. He also knew what it cost you when you let it make decisions that affected more than just your own dignity. Darlene needed insulin Friday. That was 4 days out. He had the math in his head already. "All right," he said. He put 300s on the counter. Earl took them and did not make change, did not reach for the register. "Earl," Caleb said. What you called Darius Cole." Earl's face did not change, not the face of a man who'd been caught. The face of a man who had done what he did and was surprised to be asked about it. "I did," he said. "When?" "Couple weeks back." Caleb absorbed that. 2 weeks ago, before the pump died, before the letter, before any of the particular convergence of troubles had arrived. Earl had made that call when things were merely hard rather than impossible, which meant the call had nothing to do with the crisis, and everything to do with something else he'd been watching. "He'd been looking for you," Earl said. "About a year, near as I could tell. He called me first, had my number from somewhere. I don't know how. People find what they're looking for when they look long enough. He asked if I knew where you'd landed." Earl picked up the rag beside the register and did something that wasn't really cleaning anything. "I told him I'd reach out and let him know when it seemed like the right time. And last week was the right time. Seemed like it." Caleb looked at the old man. "You could have told me he was looking." "I could have," Earl said, simple, unapologetic. The tone of a man who had considered this, made a different decision, and was not revisiting it. "But I wanted to make sure you'd pick up the phone when it rang, not let it go to voicemail and tell yourself you'd call back, not spend 2 weeks deciding whether it was a good idea." He set the rag down. "Sometimes you've got to let a thing come to a person when that person isn't braced for it." Caleb stood there. He thought about the night on the county road, the phone ringing, the unknown number, the way he'd almost not answered because he was tired and empty and heading home, and the last thing he'd wanted was more. He put his hand out. Earl shook it. Earl's grip was what it always was, not demonstrative, not crushing, just there. The grip of a man who had been doing exactly what he said he was going to do for 70 years and found no reason to be loud about it. Caleb picked up the box. He went out to his truck. He'd sat in the lot for a moment with the box on the seat beside him. 300 gone from 500 left him 200. Plus the 91 in checking. $291 against $8,400 and a mortgage payment and insulin on Friday. He knew what the 200 was for. He'd known since the night before, since the drive home, since sitting in the cab with the dashboard glow and looking at the bills and understanding that the money wasn't going to fix the large thing. The large thing required a different approach, and he was going to find that approach. And it was going to require him to ask for things he hadn't been willing to ask for and walk through doors he'd been standing outside of for too long. But first, he put the truck in reverse. Joe Summerfield's house was on a dirt road off the highway, a quarter-mile back through scrub pine. Small house, wood siding that wanted paint. A workshop out back larger than the house and in considerably better repair, because Joe was that kind of man, the workspace first, always. A truck Caleb didn't recognize sat in the driveway. He knocked. Movement inside. Then the door opened, and the woman who answered was in her late 30s, tired around the eyes, in the permanent way of someone who has been carrying worry long enough for it to become a feature rather than a state. She looked at Caleb. didn't know him. Her hand stayed on the door. "Caleb Webb," he said. "I farm out on County Road 7. I know Joe." She held the door and stepped back enough to be an invitation. The kitchen was small and clean, dishes in the rack, coffee maker going. A calendar on the wall with things written in two different handwritings on different days. Two people's schedules sharing one grid. The visible evidence of a life being coordinated rather than just lived. She went to the back door and called out. A minute later, Joe came in from the workshop. He had a rag in his hands and clean palms under dirty knuckles, the sign of a man who'd been doing finish work. He saw Caleb and something moved across his face. Surprise mostly, and something careful underneath it. Caleb. Joe. He stood in the small kitchen. Joe's wife stayed near the counter, not leaving, present in the way of a person who has learned that being present matters even when there's nothing to do. Caleb reached into his pocket. He put the $200 on the kitchen table. Two bills folded once, the same way he'd folded the 500s from Dale the night before. He didn't explain it. "For the dentist," he said. Joe looked at the money on the table. He didn't pick it up. He looked up at Caleb, and what was on his face was not simple. It was the complicated expression of a man who has been needing something and is watching it be offered without a price attached, and doesn't have a ready place to put that. "I don't need charity," Joe said, quietly, not defensive, just honest. "It's not," Caleb said. "It's a thing I can do right now." "Caleb, Joe," he stopped. Thought about how to say what he meant without saying more than he meant. "Told me about your jaw at the gas station. You didn't have to. You could have said you were fine and kept moving, and I wouldn't have known the difference. But you told me." Joe was quiet. "People around here have been deciding what to say and what not to say for a long time," Caleb said. "What to see and what not to see. I'm tired of it." A pause. "I expect you are too." Joe looked at the money. He looked at Caleb. "That from the tin roof?" he said, low, not asking in the way of wanting a full account, asking in the way of a man who already mostly knows and needs a small confirmation. Caleb didn't answer. Joe nodded. Once, slow. The nod of a man who is receiving more than $200 and is making a decision about whether he can accept what's underneath it. "Thank you," he said. He put his hand out. Caleb shook it. Joe's grip was careful, not whack, just careful, the grip of a hand that had learned to be deliberate since the shake had come into it. Caleb nodded at Joe's wife. She nodded back, something in her face that he didn't look at too closely because it had the quality of something private. He let himself out. The drive back to the farm was 15 minutes. He used them thinking about Lena Kowalski at the clinic, who had mentioned the USAID program 8 months ago while he was picking up Darlene's prescription. And he'd nodded like he was listening and let the information go past him. He thought about calling her this afternoon, about walking into that conversation with something other than the posture of a man who had everything handled. He thought about Darius, about Saturday mornings in Atlanta, about what it meant to be useful to someone not because of what you could do alone in a field, but because of what you'd survived and were still surviving. He thought about his father working land until his back broke, and then working it more. About whether that was something to honor or something to learn from differently than he had. He pulled onto County Road 7. The farm came up on his left, the tree line, the barn roof, the edge of the field where the corn had been going gold for 2 weeks and was past ready in some of the outer rows. Past ready meant loss. Loss meant a different set of numbers on a different piece of paper. He parked, he got the box from the seat. He carried it into the barn. He worked for 3 hours. It was the hardest physical work he could name, and he had a long list of hard physical work to compare it to. He had done most of that other work with a body that wasn't nursing a cracked rib. Every time he reached into the engine bay, every time he put torque on a bolt, every time he had to hold the weight of the pump unit while threading the mount, the rib told him exactly what it thought of the situation. In specific, ongoing, highly detailed terms, he worked through it. Not because he was tough, or not only that, because the alternative was stopping, and stopping meant the wheat sat in the field going further past its window. And he had not cracked a rib and driven home on an empty county road, and sat on a porch step with his mother at 2 in the morning to let the wheat go past its window. He worked slowly. He took breaks when the pain required it, sitting on the barn floor with his back against the combine's tire. Eyes closed, breathing through it until it backed off enough to continue. He got up each time. He went back to the work each time. The mounting bolts, The brackets, the hydraulic lines, each one fitted by hand first and then torqued. The electrical connector, the plastic clip finding its seat and snapping home with a sound he felt in his back teeth. He sat on the barn floor with his eyes closed for 5 minutes. Then he stood up. He climbed into the cab. Old plastic, old dust, the mineral smell of the field that had worked its way into every surface over 3 years. He'd spent more hours in this cab than in his own living room. He knew every sound it made and every way it told him things. He put the key in. He turned it. The diesel engine turned over once, twice, and caught. The sound of it filled the barn, that heavy, authoritative sound of a diesel engine deciding to live again. He felt it in his chest, in the cracked rib, in the soles of his feet on the floor of the cab. He looked at the dashboard. The voltage meter climbed, 12, 13, 14, steady, even. The rebuilt pump doing what it was built to do, pushing fluid through the systems, the machine deciding it was going to work after all. He sat there with the engine running and didn't do anything for a moment. Just sat. He thought about Earl's grip. He thought about Darlene's hand on the step beside his. He thought about Darius's voice on the phone saying, "I'm okay," in the particular way of a man who meant it. He thought about Joe Summerfield's kitchen, the calendar on the wall, 2 handwritings. He picked up his phone from the seat. He found the number he'd saved for the first time this morning. He typed, "Saturday morning. What time?" He put the phone back down on the seat beside him. He put the combine in gear. He drove out of the barn and into the morning. The light was the early kind, slanted and tentative, the light of a Georgia morning that hasn't been claimed yet by the heat. The corn stood in rows across the field, stalks crackling in the slight breeze, grain heads heavy and waiting. He dropped the header. He drove into the rows. The machine did what it was built for. Stalks feeding in, grain separating, the whole mechanical logic of harvest unfolding around him the way it had been designed to unfold. He felt it through the seat, through his hands on the controls, through his feet on the floor. The early light caught the grain dust rising from the header and turned it gold. The phone buzzed on the seat beside him. He glanced down. Darius, 1 line, 8 o'clock, I'll save you a seat. Caleb looked at it for a moment. The combine drove its line while he looked, the GPS keeping the row straight, the machine indifferent to whatever was happening above it. He put the phone back down. He didn't tie anything back. Not yet. He didn't have the words yet. Or he had too many. And either way, the field was in front of him, and the field was what was in front of him. But he left the phone on the seat, where he could see it. He looked out through the dusty windshield at the 40 acres of corn going gold in the early light of a Georgia morning, the field that had needed him and been needed in return for 3 years, the ground that had held him here when holding still was the only thing he could manage. He drove straight lines through his own land, row by row, the cut section growing behind him, the standing section shrinking in front, the harvest accumulating in the way of things at time, not all at once, not dramatically, just steadily, one pass adding to the last, the field becoming something finished instead of something waiting. The work was there, it was always there, and so was he. And for the first time in a long time, those 2 things together felt like enough to start with.